Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So this talk is, or this workshop is on immersive learning. And so what I'd like to start with is have everybody imagine that you're in this room, in this amazing city, in this beautiful room, listening to a talk from the comfort of your couch at home. So the truth of virtual reality, which a lot of my workshop is focused on today, is that we're not quite there yet, but very soon in the near future, we're all going to be able to attend workshops and conferences like this all over the world with the best speakers and the Nobel laureates from the comfort of our own home, as if we're actually there. Because there's obviously something to be said for feeling like you're in a space and being able to interact and see other people in a space with you. So over the next hour and a half, we're going to be exploring some of the ways in which that's already happening, and the crux of the matter is around design and designing these kinds of immersive learning environments so that they enable a future that helps all of us and that makes the world better for all of us. So the key message of the talk today is about how immersive learning using mixed reality, which I'll explain a bit more of just now, should be designed in order for it to live up to its world-changing potential, because it absolutely has world-changing potential. And then the action-oriented purpose, so what the purpose of this talk is for us all to understand what the perceived challenges in education currently are with the site and understanding of the opportunities that virtual reality presents us with. So before we get into that, obviously the workshop is slightly different to a talk in that it's a little bit more interactive. I would prefer it if I'm not standing up here talking to you on my own for the next hour and a half. So I'd appreciate it if you guys could get involved by asking questions, telling me your own stories, or telling us your own stories of your own experiences, or whatever it is that you feel could contribute meaningfully to this discussion, because it would make sense, and I think we'd all get a lot more value out of this if it's a discussion. So part of that, what I want to give you guys, do you want to answer that? Part of what I'd like for you guys to do, to have in the backs of your minds, because the original intention was that at the end of this workshop we all got together in groups and designed something. But what I'd ultimately like for you guys to do is look at this list of subjects. Even if there are subjects on here that or aren't on here that you guys are familiar with or have experience with, personal experience with, or something that's interesting, keep that in the back of your mind, because at the end I'm going to ask you to talk amongst yourselves or present me with questions or ideas around how you think what I'm going to talk to you about today could be used in order to provide some value around teaching and around learning in those subjects. I wasn't introduced, so my secretary prepared a slide, just a little introduction of myself, so who I am. I know in the program I'm mentioned as being the managing director of a company called Formula D Interactive, which is true. I'm the managing director and co-owner of the company. I have a background in architecture. I studied architecture. I worked for a banking group in South Africa called Investec for a few years. I was in the financial services field. I worked for an organization called One Laptop Per Child, which was born out of a program from MIT in the US. I'm the co-founder of the Learning Innovation Design Lab, which is a non-profit in South Africa that teaches kids how to code and design games. And then the managing director of Formula D Interactive. And so what Formula D Interactive is an international design firm that ultimately designs interactive learning environments. So very much why I was asked to run this workshop today. And so the reason that Formula D exists now is because of mine and my partner's passion for for education and technology, and how technology can have an impact in education and a very real impact in people's learning. My personal experience of learning as a child in school was particularly bad. I grew up in a rural place, and my school was pretty bad. None of the good teachers in my country wanted to go and teach where I grew up. So the school wasn't great, and I wasn't a particularly good student. And the way that they taught back then, in fact still now, didn't suit my way of learning. So that led me to Formula D and creating a company that ultimately tries to find solutions that make or facilitate the interaction with content, because the majority of learning happens, or the best learning happens, when people are engaging with content. In terms of our kind of history with this region, so we've had a long association with the Middle East. We did our first big project at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, the Masti Museum, the Museum of Science and Technology in Islam. For those of you aren't familiar with it, that was in 2009. So we created all those interactive exhibits in that museum that still exists today. Hi. Is this for something else? No. Right. Thank you. We've done work for the Saudi Food and Drug Authority as well, and so I'm just telling you this to set some context. We have some experience in working in the region, and we're always looking to do more work, because we love the region, and we find it an honor to work with the projects that we've been working with, and we'd like to do more, of course. So, moving on. As I said, I had a really bad educational experience. I was definitely not the guy in the back reading. I was staring out the window. I was this girl sitting in the front there. And I mean, I'm not telling you this because I want anyone to feel sorry for me, but I want you to have an understanding of where I'm coming from, and that I'm sure most of you know that this is the experience that probably the vast majority of children around the world actually have when it comes to formal schooling. And ultimately, we know that there's a better way of doing it, and so we believe, of course, that technology is one of those ways, and the implementation of technology and the design of that technology in a meaningful way will have a meaningful impact. Today we're going to focus on mixed reality as a means to that engagement and that creation of interaction. That's mine, yeah. Please don't take it. Thank you. Is there something else? Okay, I'll carry on. So mixed reality as the genre of technology that we're going to focus on, because I believe it is the one that has the greatest potential for meaningful and profound impact on learning and education in the next few years. So this is a quote that pretty much defines and has defined our company ethos from the beginning. I don't believe that Benjamin Franklin is the person that did this. Early on, when we adopted this, it was supposedly a Chinese proverb. But ultimately, this encompasses what it is that we do and what we truly believe. And that tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I may remember, and involve me and I will learn. So everything we do is around involving children and people with content and with subject matter so that they learn in a more effective way. So this that you're looking at here is what's known as the virtual continuum. If I may, can I just ask a question? How many of you here have had first-hand experience of virtual reality? A show of hands. Wow, so like 2 people. So the majority of you haven't even worn one of those headsets and been able to look around in a different environment? That's amazing, that's great. You have? Okay, so a lot of you have? Okay, because only 2 people put up their hands. Okay, so I mean a lot of people have at least had a taste, whether it's with their cell phone, but obviously, you know, there's kind of a lot of different types of mixed reality, and I'm going to talk to them now. So everything from a real environment. So a real environment is what we're all experiencing right now, is being in an actual space next to actual people, seeing actual things in front of us in 3D. Right through to the virtual environment and everything in between. Augmented reality is obviously what it says, augmented, so it's something, it's an overlay over reality. We'll look at some examples. Augmented virtuality, which is a type of augmented reality in a virtual space, so it's being in a virtual environment and having overlays, and in a virtual environment where you're completely and utterly immersed. Your field of vision is completely covered by something that is not real, that has been created. So I'll take you through some actual examples. So this is us, the real environment that we're all experiencing right now. Augmented reality can be silly things like mobile apps for selfies with little overlays of costumes and whatever. Snapchat is a classic example. I don't know if that's a thing here. And then of course Pokemon, that was a game that was enormous, I think a year or 2 ago, with kids running around looking for little characters in augmented reality on their cell phones. Something that's becoming more and more prevalent now is heads-up displays. That's something that fighter pilots have had for quite a long time, but now we're starting to get that in our cars. Just an overlay of what we're seeing in front of us with information about our speed and telemetry. And then there's obviously a whole host of medical applications and other applications around augmented reality. The device on the left is called HoloLens. That's a Microsoft device that is really a consumer device, but not really. The one on the right is Google Glass, also an augmented reality type device. And I've put, I mean, there are lots of other devices like this, but I've put these 2 up specifically because when Google and Microsoft invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a product that's barely consumer grade, then you know that they're onto something, or the technology is going to make a big splash. And then of course virtual reality, which is probably the one that more people know about, less people have experienced, but this is about, again, being in a completely immersed in an environment. And those of you that have tried it before will know that the sensation is quite strange, especially when you leave the environment. Because you put on this headset and you're in a different world. You know that it's a virtual world. You can feel it, you can see it, you can see certain things, markers that tell you that it's a virtual world. But at some point, very early on, your brain switches off and believes that it's in this other environment. And then when you take that headset off and you're in the real environment again, it's quite jarring. It's a very interesting sensation. Just another thing to add with virtual reality, most people are familiar with virtual reality when it comes to head-mounted displays, HMDs. But the truth is that virtual reality can also happen in a space. So I'll show you some examples as well that we can kind of cover a person's field of vision in a space and make them feel like they're somewhere else without having a headset on. I'll show you some examples of how we've done the same thing. And then obviously when you kind of start imagining how virtual reality can be implemented in a In a formal education environment, you think about things that like Google's already doing with Google Tours, where kids can virtually visit the pyramids, can go on safaris in Africa, visit Mars. This Clouds over Sidra is I use this as an example in another talk I did, because one of the other things that virtual reality, aside from educating people, is good at doing is creating empathy. So putting people in situations they normally wouldn't be put in, to give them somebody else's perspective and try and generate some empathy for that person's plight, and ideally create more understanding and more compassion. When you have a technology that can do that, then I think you've got something that's very interesting. So this is something that we created. This is the first virtual reality educational exhibit, at least in Africa. So we created this almost 2 years ago now, and it's the shark sensors exhibit. And what the purpose of this exhibit is to teach people about how sharks hunt in order to survive, and how they use their different senses. So another interesting thing, why I use this example more so than to show off, is to give you an example of how virtual reality using other senses, it can be an effective learning tool. And what I mean by that is this particular exhibit obviously uses sight as a sense. So when you put your face up against the Oculus headset, you're seeing an underwater environment from the perspective of a shark, and you have to swim around. You get to guide yourself around in order to swim around and look for fish to eat. And what sharks do in a normal environment is they use their sense of sight, of course, they use their sense of hearing, they use their sense of smell, and they use their sense of touch when they're up close. And so what this exhibit does is it taps into all of those senses. Because as you all know, aside from being in an experience, when we experience something that's meaningful or that we really remember, we tend to remember obviously what we saw, we tend to remember what we heard, what we smelt, what things felt like. And so the more senses you can appeal to, the better your chances are of remembering something. And so that's what this exhibit does. When the shark is within the right distance from its prey, it starts smelling, and a fan activates inside the shark's head and blows a scent into the user's face. There are speakers built into the headset as well, so when it starts hearing a fish swimming around, you can hear it. And then when it gets close enough that it uses the special nervous system on the tip of its nose to sense movement, the handlebars vibrate in the actual exhibit. So it encompasses all of those different senses in order to enhance the learning experience. And we're now developing this further to encompass other animals. And this was something that was created for a client who is a conservationist. So the main purpose of this, aside from teaching kids how animals survive and how they live, is to create some compassion, to create better understanding in order to foster conservation. The actual immediate real-time feedback on the experiments and the things that they're doing, on the equipment that they're using, and they have virtual tablets and computers in the space that provide them with that feedback and with the data as if it was happening in real time. And that's the other thing, is that they can also create insights. They can view molecules, they can view molecular structures, DNA structures, because it's virtual. Scientists know what those things look like, and they can provide that vision to students without, virtually. So that just adds another layer of learning. This is it even goes outside of the lab. So this is just a demo of field studies. So students going out into the field and collecting samples of things to take back to the lab to test. I'm not sure what that is. This is like a crime scene. I don't know what that is. And then this is just an image of the students interacting with the lab on their laptop. So that's the other thing, is that this isn't confined to virtual reality, if we can say confined. This is something that's accessible on a screen. So therefore the reach is even larger than just on a virtual reality device. So just a quick slide to show how the impact of using laboratory simulations, what the impact is on learning. So obviously the 76% more effective than traditional teaching, which is pretty amazing, aside from the fact that the results that interacting with that lab can produce in terms of discoveries and inventions. So astronomy, just an example how being in a virtual world can allow kids to travel through the universe and view planets and orbits and all kinds of things that they wouldn't normally be able to view from that kind of perspective, and showing overlays of information which would, in this case, would relate back to augmented virtuality. The medical applications are obvious. Being able to view structures, molecular structures, organ structures, how things move, how they work in 3D space, and allowing potential students or potential surgeons to experiment and to do live experiments and operations on 3D models without the risk of killing anyone could be quite powerful. History. So if you start imagining the possibilities of, history for me when I was a kid was my worst subject. But if you can imagine being able to place students in certain events, recreating certain events, certain meetings, certain conversations, and being able to have them observe or even participate in those in a way that will enhance the memory of that, can be quite powerful. And then of course there's just creativity and fun. This is a tool called Tilt Brush that I think Google developed as well, that is ultimately just a 3D virtual world canvas. And what it allows you to do is to paint and to sculpture in 3D and really just have fun. But in that process, you get an understanding of the structure of things, and you're actually building something and getting an understanding of how that works. And at the same time being able to express yourself creatively, which is an important human need. So I mentioned a little bit earlier how virtual reality is not entirely dependent on head-mounted displays. It is also something that can be in a space. This was a virtual aquarium that we created for an aquarium actually in Miami in the United States, and what this is this a huge projection wall that when you stand in front of it covers your complete field of vision, and shows you animations of sea creatures that you would not either normally see, or that are extinct, or that cannot be kept in captivity, but that also react to your movements. So it's also about that interaction. So if you approach the wall, if there's a school of fish swimming around, you approach the wall and you touch the wall, the fish disperse. And the tracking system also picks up logs. I don't know if you guys can see this. That's a log. Those kids up there holding virtual torches. The tracking system picks up those things and allows the kids to create actions within this virtual environment. And when they're in it, they're in it. All they can see is the Miami Everglades when it rains, and during the day and during the night, when it floods, when it empties, the little crocodiles running around creating dams, looking for animals with a with a virtual spotlight in the space. So ultimately, this creates a fun and an interactive environment. What we really like about this, and a lot of what we believe in, and a lot of what we do in terms of creating interactions, is as much as we believe that technology can highly enhance interaction between people and content and enhance the learning, we believe that even more than that, using technology and design to create or facilitate interaction between human beings is even more powerful. That we learn we learn at our best when we're learning from each other, by engaging with each other. So if we can use technology to do that, then we're onto a good thing. So now I want to just talk quickly about some emerging technologies and practices within mixed reality and virtual reality. So the image with the eye relates to foveated rendering. One of the big challenges and issues with virtual reality at the moment is the processing power that's required in order to render a 360-degree scene at all times, even though you're not looking at all of it, is extremely high, the demands on the technology, and basically unnecessary. If I'm in a virtual, if this was a virtual environment and I was looking there, all the stuff behind me and outside of my field of vision should not need to be rendered because I'm not looking at it. But at the moment it needs to be, and it is. But the technology now is being developed with eye tracking. So what companies are doing is building eye tracking technology into the headsets so that they can track within fractions of millimeters exactly where your eye is looking, and have the processors, the graphic processors in the computers, only render what you're looking at, what you're focused on. And actually, when you're looking at something, the field that is in focus is actually very small. So the amount of rendering that needs to happen is actually the kind of high-res rendering that needs to happen is very small. Another thing is full body tracking and having avatars. Part of the reason for that is what I just mentioned just now, is most people in this environment and in this field understand the need for human interaction, and one of the drawbacks of virtual reality, at least with the head-mounted display, is the fact that you are disconnected from other people in the environment, or disconnected from another human being entirely. So the technology around tracking a person's movements, specifically having an avatar that is as representative as possible, so that if I'm wearing a head-mounted display, I can be standing next to this gentleman and I can look at him and I can talk to him, and he can do the same with me, even though it's not really him. So that's another technology that's emerging. Another thing with eye tracking that I wanted to mention that's starting to be trialed, and there's a lot of interesting things happening with that, is in the classroom. So what certain teachers have done and experimented quite successfully with is using eye tracking in order to understand what kids are looking at any given time, what's holding their attention, being able to, in real time, identify who's not paying attention, who's dozing off, and be able to grab that child's attention to try and pull them back in. And then even get data after class to see how the lesson and the lesson plan, how kids reacted to it, and adapting the lesson plan in order to make it more interesting and more feasible for kids to look at. That picture up at the top on the right, I've already alluded to that, is using the sense of smell. This was an experiment where they used kind of sensors in the cutlery, low-calorie foods, and aromatic diffusers, so devices that release certain smells. So feeding people food that is not high fat or unhealthy, but providing them with smells at the same time to make them think that it is, and have them actually eat a lot healthier food. So a bit of a strange experiment, but just an insight into what's coming. Vive Focus is a wireless head-mounted display. Most of the kind of top of the range head-mounted displays now are tethered, so they're wired to something, and that makes movement in a space really difficult. You tend to have to be standing in one place, or if you're moving around, you tend to trip on, and you don't really want to trip when you're wearing a head-mounted display, because you're definitely going to bash your head open somewhere. So that's that. Some more emerging technologies is top right is inside-out tracking. So the way the systems work now is you have a head-mounted display, outside tracking cameras tracking your movement in a particular space, or tracking the headset in a particular space, so that the visuals that you're being provided with are in sync and don't make you feel sick. But now the technology is being implemented where the monitoring and the sensors are built into the headset, and they are scanning the environment to show the device where it is in real time, in real space. And then there's hand tracking as well. A weird thing in virtual reality is holding up your hands and not seeing anything. It's a very strange sensation, and that's changing. Another super interesting thing, and this is something that we're actually busy with now, we're busy developing a kids edutainment center where kids interact with a character that teaches them things, and they can see the character on a screen, pops up on a screen, and they can hold out their hand, and what they're seeing on the screen, a little character jumps onto their hand. And we're using a system like that is an array of speakers that transmits sound to a particular point and create a sensation. So what we're doing is we're mounting the speaker overhead, and when a little character jumps onto a kid's hand, they get the sensation that something has actually landed on their hands. So that kind of suspends disbelief, creates a deeper level of interaction, which is, again, ultimately what we're looking for. So part of what our, the objective of today was to talk about the design of these things. So we all get a sense of what the possibilities with virtual reality are, what is happening already, but ultimately the most important part of everything around any use of virtual reality for education and for learning is around the design process. So we take great care when it comes to the design process, and a successful design project requires a process and systematic approach to design. And starting off with setting the objective. So that's probably the most important part of the whole step. It's the foundation for everything. What is it that we're wanting to achieve here? What is it that you want? You want kids to learn a particular concept. You want them to engage with each other. You want them. What is it that you are wanting to achieve? That's super important. And then the next step is to research your target audience. So who is the target audience? Are they children? If they're children, are they children between what ages? Are they adults? Are they everybody? You have to establish who your target audience is and do some very detailed and systematic research into understanding what their motives are, what motivates them, what their behaviors are. And then you've got to, based off that, you've got to come up with a strategy. So what's the strategy that you're going to employ in order to engage with this particular target audience? And once you've developed that strategy, you have to test the strategy. We see it all the time where people design things thinking that what they're designing is going to have the desired impact without ever talking to their target audience or trialing anything, and 99% of the time it doesn't work. So you have to do user testing. With us, our process is that we tend to do 2-week sprints, which means we develop something, we design something, and over a 2-week period, and after that 2-week period, we bring in our user group and we do testing on what we've designed and developed to that point in order to establish whether or not it's actually having the desired impact. And if it isn't, then we spend the next 2 weeks making tweaks and changes in order to try and achieve that objective. And we check again 2 weeks in 2 weeks' time. And if we still haven't achieved that in 2 weeks' time, we go back to the drawing board. We keep going until we see the desired effect playing out with our user group. Obviously, budget control. I've never had a client come to me and ask me to design him something without any budget. I wish. But obviously, budget is one of the constraints. Technology is another constraint. Time is another constraint. But budget obviously is something that has to be established, at least parameters up front, and throughout the process also monitoring and making sure that the activities that you are performing and that the end goal that you're working towards from a timeline perspective is still in sync with the budget. And then of course you've got to evaluate. And that partly is around presenting regular reports to your client or to your user group with analysis on key performance indicators and the achievement or not of the design intent. So to that end, just as an example, the virtual reality environment that I showed you with the Miami Everglades, with the kids with the logs and the virtual torches. So this is just you don't worry about reading that, but this is just to show you a table that we came up with. In fact, this slide should have come first. So what we did was we looked at the target audience, and then we did research and we did observation around what are the things that kids of that age group do for fun. So it's things like playing hopscotch, doing treasure hunts, catching something in the water, imitating animals, balancing, playing hide and seek, building dams. So all things that we literally observed, and then we took all these elements and brought them into the design of the virtual reality environment. Excuse me. So here we listed all the activities, the description, and then the area on which those activities would be housed within that virtual environment, what the effects would be to demonstrate those activities, that to provide the feedback to those kids that those activities are happening, and then the animals and plants that are linked to that are, from the client's perspective, were a requirement to show to the kids so that they have a better understanding. Can someone give me a time check? Does anyone know? Anyway. So this was the outcome. This is the slide you saw earlier. So you can see kids could build dams with the logs, catch little crocodiles that would run around in the water, use the torch to find animals, imitate animals so they can pretend like they're birds, and the birds in the environment would do the same thing, would mimic their movements. So all the things that we observed kids doing in real space were translated into this virtual space in order to enhance the interaction. So of course, pedagogical underpinnings are extremely important. So how, the kind of science behind teaching and learning, and how this actually gets incorporated into the designs is extremely important. And I mean, I don't believe that that VR or AR or any other technology should be seen as a silver bullet for solving the world's education issues, but they certainly are a major tool to help to increase the level of learning and decrease the pressure that is already on most educational systems. We still believe that teachers are an extremely important part of the education process. And so we by no means see technology as a way to get rid of teachers or even the need for them. because we fundamentally believe that human beings require human interaction, they require compassion, they require love, they require caring in normal life, and that's no different in the learning environment. So no human can learn or survive or thrive without that. So when designing immersive learning environments, the media tools have to consider these pedagogical underpinnings so as to ensure that that the effects are what we intend them to be. So just kind of an example of the theory behind interaction. It's kind of well-established research, scientific fact that that listening to a lecture like you're kind of doing right now is the worst possible way to learn something. So that's ironic, but obviously the most effective is teaching. But it's not really viable to make teachers out of every human being out there. But certainly it's viable through the use of technology to be able to have people to engage with content, with concepts by actually getting involved and doing them, or kind of being interacting with them specifically. I'm going to skip that. Okay, I'm going to show you. So this looks a bit strange. This was actually an art project, and the whole idea behind it, what the artist was trying to convey here, it's a pretty long video. He literally filmed children playing computer games. So, and the idea was about demonstrating how intensely engaged they are with computer games. And the artist said, imagine we could get kids to feel this way or to engage this intensely with educational content. Imagine what education would be like. And so this is probably about 10 years old, this project, but I've always watched it and always show it whenever I do these talks, because okay, this kid is not a great example. He looks like he might just be watching TVs. But it is a great demonstration of how interaction is powerful. Challenges with virtual reality. So the way I'm talking about virtual reality, it can be the be-all and end-all and kind of save humanity and education. But the truth of the matter is that there's still a lot of issues with virtual reality, and some of those are on the left. What you can see there's something that's called the screen door effect. The top image doesn't translate very well on this, but this is a close-up of that. Ultimately, you've got a screen that's right up against your face with a magnifying glass in front of it, so you kind of got this screen magnified, and you end up seeing pixels, and that's what creates this screen door effect. It's like you're looking through a wire mesh, which isn't great, and certainly from a real deep immersive experience perspective, it still creates that slight barrier. The other thing is motion sickness. So the motion sickness that happens when there's a very, very slight delay between what your eyes are seeing and what your brain is picking up. As soon as there's the slightest difference in that, you start feeling sick. And virtual reality, the technology that exists today, is very imperfect when it comes to that, and a lot of people get sick very easily just being in a virtual environment. But that's all about speed and technology, which is speeding up really fast. So that's not going to be a constraint for too long. The other thing, of course, is a constraint is money. Really good virtual reality equipment is expensive. It's relatively expensive. The devices themselves are not crazy expensive, but certainly the computers that need to run them, and they're not particularly mobile. So that's certainly an issue. It's not like a phone that everybody's got, and there's an ecosystem that exists in most places that allows everybody to have a really good phone. The other constraint is imagination, because a lot of what is going to be necessary in order to create really good VR experiences, educational ones and otherwise, is imagination. And then the other is about the personal interaction in the virtual reality space. Wearing a head-mounted display like that, you're not going to have a direct interactive experience with another human being as if they're standing in front of you. And that, to me, that's quite a major constraint. Again, something that is going to be overcome fairly soon. So, who can design for VR? And the answer to that question is anybody who wants to. Ultimately, it comes down to the process that I spoke about earlier. In order to create a meaningful virtual reality experience, you've got to go through a design process. And so I just want to quickly tell you guys a story about something I mentioned early on around one of my organizations, the Learning Innovation Design Lab, which is a non-profit that teaches kids how to code, kids in disadvantaged areas, teaches them how to code and to design games. And the idea behind that was twofold. So one was obviously to teach kids how to code, because everybody or most people understand that coding is a language that anyone who wants to be prepared for the future should know, and designing games, because games are things that we as human beings are intrinsically attached to and enjoy from when we're babies. We come up with games and we play games, and so to combine those two things in order to learn, we felt was a really powerful combination, and we've proven to be right. But what we also wanted to do is have kids creating games, and we brief them to create games which are linked to their curriculum, to things that they're learning in school. And so what inevitably happens is that kids design games around concepts and ideas that they already understand. So whether it's algebra, or something in maths, Pythagoras, or something, they end up creating a game, and even if it's a simple game, around the subject matter they already understand. And that's fine. It's fine because they'll end up more likely creating a game that is fun to play, and even better than that, a game that other kids that don't yet understand those concepts can play. So creating a kind of app store marketplace of games, educational games directly linked to the curriculum for kids, designed by kids. And so I think I'm mentioning this story because I think that enabling kids and as the technology develops, as the tools for creating virtual reality content develop and become more ubiquitous and easier to use, that kids are going to be designing experiences that other kids will use to learn, and I think that's really powerful. And obviously, having teachers do that is also a really exciting prospect. So now the intention here was that we either do a group discussion or do some Q&A. If anyone has any contributions, anyone has anything to say around these questions, I'd love to hear your feedback, or if you have any questions of your own for me based on what I've said today, on my experience, or in what you're thinking around VR, I'd love to hear them. Anything? Anyone? Is anyone here a teacher? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Really, before I have a question here.
Yes.
You argued that the kids are attracted by games.
Yes.
When they watch video. Do you think that this is applicable to educational context?
Games.
No. That children or kids are attracted and highly paying full attention to games, and they are. But in case of education, do you think they are the same?
So certainly there are games that are purely for entertainment, and look, it can probably be argued that most of the really well-known games have something in them that is of educational value, whether it's hand-eye coordination or something, some educational value. But from an strictly educational perspective, probably not. But then the idea is, so what we're trying to do by teaching kids to code and to design games is to try and get them to think about designing games that have more educational value, that aren't just about running through the streets, shooting things or whatever. Because we truly believe that serious games, which is a game that is educational ultimately, are extremely effective learning tools for education.
Yeah, but what I understood, maybe I am wrong, that you think that if we design a learning context in a manner, they will be paying full attention, be attracted, as if they were doing a game.
So you mean if you're doing the educational material in virtual reality?
Yes. So do you think that the kids will be attracted like the games?
So, good question. That's a research paper, I think. But certainly the level of engagement in virtual reality or mixed reality, as opposed to traditional teaching methodologies, is certainly, I mean, it's proven. There I can reference 50 research papers over the past 15 or 20 years that scientifically prove that fact. Games to a different degree, how different that I couldn't quote. I couldn't quote on.
Sorry for that question. You mentioned number of steps on the successful design project.
Yes.
You said testing and evaluation. Testing what? Testing the material and evaluating the students, or what?
Yeah. So testing the design.
The design.
Testing the design. So you're designing something. You're designing some kind of interaction with content, and then it's about establishing how that interaction is happening. So there's a few evaluation points that you need to be observing. So are they enjoying the interaction? Because you can put kids in a room and say, interact with this, and they'll sit there and say, oh, I'm doing this because I was told to do this. So you have to try and gauge the level of enjoyment with the interaction. You've got to gauge the intuitiveness of the interaction. So without sitting there saying, okay, you must do this and you must do that, you must press this button, leave them to their own devices and assess whether or not the way you've designed it is intuitive, that they can do it on their own. If you're wanting to encourage interaction between them, observing whether or not that's happening. And that's what I mean. So it's making observations based on the objectives and then evaluating those and then deciding whether or not you need to make tweaks to the design.
Okay, sorry, I came late.
No problem.
What does VR stand for?
Virtual reality.
Virtual reality.
Yeah. Pleasure. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the lecture, and thanks for Aspar.
Thank you.
I think on the first question.
Yes.
I think the biggest challenge in education today is what the gentleman was talking about: how to attract children to listen and to concentrate.
Yep.
That's one of the biggest challenges. Another challenge, I think, and I speak for Saudi Arabia, even though I'm not in the education business, it's being realistic, going to the job market, looking what the job market is today and tomorrow, within the next 4 or 5 years, and seeing how you can craft education just a little bit. We don't want to make scientists out of our children,
Sure.
but just to give them the touch and the feel, okay, and to be able to grasp what potential these children have,
Yep.
and what areas to gear them in the right direction, and to try to nourish their ambition and if they have any gifts
Yep.
to offer. I
Yeah.
think that's the main challenge.
Yep.
But just to teach them this mumbo jumbo and keep on memorizing and keep on explaining and keep on solving math and physics and this, and to isolate ourselves from the current job market where mankind is going to go in the first place at the end.
Yep.
To survive in life.
Yep.
So this has to be a reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to try to live the status quo and to try to facilitate ahead of time what's going to be difficult in the future if you don't facilitate.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely, I agree 100%. We've got exactly the same challenges in South Africa, and part of the challenge is a system that is so deeply entrenched in our society, in our governments, that looking at changing that is it's almost implausible for the people that run that system. But absolutely, sooner or later we're going to come to the realization that the way we're training our children today, we're training them for things that in 20 years' time robots are going to be doing. There's no need for them to be learning that now. We need to be training them for other things, and also identifying what it is that they respond to, are interested in, and should be geared towards. And I think that technology has a big role to play in that, because what technology and interaction with technology can do is provide data. And what data is feedback. So if you get provided with data constantly, as long as you understand how to interpret the data and to read the data, being able to do that will allow for much more customized responses to kids' interests and skill sets. And I think that's very important. Thank you for that. Thank you. Anything else anybody would like to say or ask? Yes, sir.
I apologize for being very late because I wasn't aware that this workshop's there.
No problem. Welcome.
A comment regarding the first question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I work at the Saudi Arabian National Oil Company, Saudi Aramco.
Yes, I'm familiar with the company.
The first question you're raising with the group on what are the biggest challenges in education at the moment, there are many.
Sure.
There are many challenges at the society level and at the, but what us in the industry, what we are challenged with is the output of the educational system, is the alignment between what the universities graduate and the vocational centers and schools with the evolving and transformational expectations that the industry is looking for. Now we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, IR 4.0, something that we in Aramco, we take this very seriously. We have a big strategic investment in IR 4.0.
Okay.
Internet of Things, big data, cybersecurity, virtual reality,
Yep.
and all of this. So the question is, the educational system need to respond to this in a way, embedding these technological digitalization trend in their curricula and creating awareness among the faculty, the students, in order to have a product that we, it's not only us in Aramco, and other major players in the industry, petrochemical giants like SABIC or STC or whatever, banks even. And this is a challenge, how the educational system responds. And I think I must say even in South Africa as well, where you come from, is a challenge of aligning industry versus education. So I thought just, and I apologize for being late, I missed it. It seems to be a very interesting conversation.
Absolutely, no problem. Thanks for that input. That's very valid. And my opinion on that is that in changing the education system to suit the current environment. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Fad Dajani. I'm an actor and writer. I want to talk about the ideas for how visual reality could be used. I'm not sure about this idea, probably think about it. It is, you know, when people said, you should walk in my shoes so you can know what's going to happen in my life.
Yeah. Empathy.
Make decisions.
Yeah.
So this probably is good for teenagers when they graduate from high school.
Yeah.
So most of them, and I remember when I was graduate from high school, I don't know what I'm gonna do in the future. Am I gonna become a doctor or an engineer? So probably if it, you know, like the student told them, okay, how about you live one week as a doctor, or if it's gonna fit with you, you can continue this
in their path.
career.
Yeah.
Not sure if they think about it or not. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, definitely that's, there've already been some ideas and some executions around that, around those concepts, and I mean, they make complete sense. It's quite difficult. I mean, you being an actor is interesting because if you think about virtual reality as a as a medium for storytelling, it's quite interesting but super challenging because you can't define the movement in a virtual reality space. So if you think about theater as an example, even a movie, but theater is better because you can relate to people right near you. You're watching some kind of theater, you're watching some kind of play being played out, you are watching something happen in sequence. If you now are wanting people to get involved in that, that's extremely difficult. How can you incorporate individuals into a story? I mean, Hollywood hasn't figured that out yet. So it's an extremely difficult thing. If you think about any play and think about how could you make that play interactive so that someone could step into that play and engage with the actors. As soon as there's an engagement, there's a change in the storyline. So how do you deal with that? And what happens next as a result of that engagement? That's a very challenging thing to do. But certainly from giving people experiences of other vocations, of being a doctor, working on an oil rig, whatever. Certainly you can give people a sense of what the practicalities. It's not easy to send a child or even a 17 or an 18-year-old to an oil rig for a few days or a few hours to get them to experience what it's like to work on one. But certainly with virtual reality you can do that. And I think that's, I mean, the experiences, the design of the experiences is going to be super important, the design of them. But I think that's definitely something that's going to happen more and more. And therefore help people to make much better choices about their career paths. Yeah, thanks for that. Anyone else? Any questions? Ideas? I'm always open to ideas. I'm happy to use your ideas for myself. No? Okay. Well, I think that brings me to the end of my talk and workshop, and I'll end with that. So great designers equals great design, which equals a positive impact. Thank you very much.